Hi, this is the first in a series of tutorials about Maya's PaintEffects module. PaintEffects is something that's really unique to Maya, and it allows you to do a lot of interesting things that would be difficult to do with either with particle systems, other dynamics, or traditional modeling. And what PaintEffects is a way to paint objects into your scene that are procedurally built. And so, because they're procedural objects, you can change the settings to change their nature. You can animate their changes and things like that. So if we just look at this image here from the help files, you see all of these objects in here, the trees, grass, flowers, maybe the butterflies, are all created with PaintEffects. They're not modeled by hand, but they're built using a procedural modeling technique, and you paint them into your scene. So before we start looking at these things and how they can apply to biomedical animation, let's just look at the basics of PaintEffects and just some of the terminology that we'll be using here. So if we go into Maya, if you go to your PaintEffects tab up here in the shelf, you'll see that there are a bunch of presets available to you here. You can select any of these, but if you want a wider variety of PaintEffects presets, you can click on these two brushes. This icon will open up the visor, and you'll see that there are lots of different types of brushes. So it's not just about plants, it's all about different types of things. Liquid, markers, metal, objects, but they're all based on the same construction principles. But they're very flexible with lots of settings, so you can use the same settings to create something as different as confetti or metal weave or duct, or even different types of food and things like that. Now this is a great place to start learning PaintEffects by going in and selecting some of the presets and working with them and see how they're created, and then modifying their settings to create what you need for your animation. But we can also select them just from up here. So let's just look at the basic components of PaintEffects here. So if I just click on the daisies, if I just click and paint on my scene, by default it's just going to paint on the zero plane of my world here. And we have to just talk a little bit about the terminology. You can see that what I painted here, the path that I took with my brush left a stroke behind. So this is called the PaintEffects stroke. And this stuff that is renderable, the objects that are growing out of it, or the objects that go along it in other cases, that's called the PaintEffects brush. So you select a brush up here, but once you paint with it, this part of the PaintEffects is called the brush now. So if I still have that daisy tool active and I just paint again, they're both based on the same brush, but they're actually now considered two different brushes. I know this is a little confusing, but if I select this daisy and open it up, this brush is called Daisy Large 1, and this brush is called Daisy Large 2, so they're separate nodes, even though they're based on the same Daisy Large brush. But because they're separate nodes, they can be edited separately, so we can turn things on and off in one without affecting the other one. You can turn them on, tubes on and off. So you notice when I turn that off, this thing called tubes here in Maya, when I turn that off, then I get just an object going along the PaintEffects stroke. This is called a simple PaintEffects stroke, or a simple brush, and that's one that is just painted along the surface. So there are some presets that are like that already. Like if I just select this one that just sort of paints a tube, and it's a good way to make a renderable curve. But these ones that aren't like that are called PaintEffects. These brushes are tube brushes. This is a simple brush. And you can't have one brush that does both. If you want to have something that has a tube with these branches going out of it, you can put two different brushes on one curve to simulate that. Okay. So you can see that I've just been painting by grabbing a brush and painting on the surface. But there are lots of different ways to apply PaintEffects in your scene. So that's the most straightforward way. But sometimes you want to actually paint on a surface. So if I create something like a NURBS sphere, there's a little button up here. It's Make Object Paintable, or Make Paintable. And if I have this object selected and click on it, then select a brush, and then you'll see that it's painting right on the surface. For some reason it didn't like the first brush, but you can see this is a way to paint on an object, and they're historically bound to each other, so if I move the sphere then it'll stick to it. So it's a way that, say you modeled a cell or something and you wanted to coat the surface with microvilli, or the lining of intestinal gut with villi or something like that, this is a way that you could do it. But again, I'm still just using the paint method. You can also use what's called the Autopaint tool. So if I select the daisy again and I go to PaintEffects, let me just open up this menu, and I can go to excuse me, Autopaint. You can either paint grid or paint random. And so you can just change all these settings about the size of the grid and how dense these things are applied. Oops, sorry. Now you have to actually have an object first to paint on. So go to Auto Paint, Paint Grid, and then you can see that it just paints along a grid, so they're fairly regularly placed. You should be aware though that each one of these is now a separate brush. So if I wanted to, and you can see that each one has its own stroke that's attached to this surface. This is a little bit inconvenient because if you say you wanted to change all the leaves from green to pink or something, you have to go into each node and make that change. Anyway, I'm going to delete all of these. You can also go to Auto Paint, Paint Random, and it will not paint along a grid, but sort of try and randomize the positioning of these. But you'll notice that under Paint Random, you can have Equalization turned on. And what this does is it tries to not have any overly large empty areas or any big conglomerations of paint effects. So it's random, but it's trying to space them somewhat evenly, but just not in a grid. That's if Equalization is turned on. If I undo and turn Equalization off, well, it did the same thing, but because it's random and being done randomly, sometimes you can wind up with big clumps of PaintEffects objects. Okay, so those are the basics. We're going to next look at modifying the brushes and doing some animation on these. Okay, thanks. Just to add on to what I was saying before, when you create multiple brushes, say I use this daisy, create one brush and then create two brushes, I've got two strokes, each has its own brush. But like I was saying just a moment ago, sometimes that's inconvenient. But there is a way to make them share the same brush. If you just select the stroke from one and then shift select the stroke with the brush that you want them both to share, so they both share the same daisy form, you can then just click on share one brush and they should both be sharing daisy 2. So if I open the attribute editor, so daisy large 2, oops. Now if I make changes to this, we should see changes on both strokes, and we do. So sometimes when you use that auto paint, either grid or random, you may want to change it so they're all sharing one brush, and you can have them all editable at once. Doesn't mean they'll all be exactly the same, because there are some randomization factors here as built into the PaintEffects brushes. So if you have a field of these daisies, they won't seem exactly the same from one to the next. Okay, thanks.